Now let's talk about the religious world of the Greek East. This is going to inform a lot of what's going on in the religion that's medicine adjacent in the Roman world too. There are several gods who are associated with healing in Greco-Roman religion, but the one dedicated god to healing was a hero god named Asclepius, and I've given you a couple spellings of his name. Asclepius or Asclepius are two ways of spelling his Greek name. Aesculapius or Aesculapius is how Romans pronounced his name. It's the same guy. You know you're looking at him because he'll be this bearded dude with a walking stick that has a single snake crawling up it. One snake, not two. More about that in a minute. Now, I say hero god because his backstory is that he was the son of Apollo and one of Apollo's girlfriends. And Apollo, don't date Apollo, is my first bit of advice here. She was pregnant by Apollo and then had a mortal boyfriend she was also having sex with. Apollo found out, got mad, killed her, and then was like, oh shit, she's pregnant. So he cut her body open and performed a C-section to rescue the baby, who became Asclepius. Side note, C-sections could be done in the ancient world, but they were not survivable by the parent. If you cut a baby out of somebody's body in the ancient world, they're going to die. It was used as a last-ditch attempt to try to rescue the baby if the mother was dead or in the process of dying. It was more common to try to save the mother's life than to rescue the child. I'm not going to get into that too much here. I just felt like it's important to point this out because sometimes you'll see popular sources that'll say, oh yes, Romans did C-sections, and then they won't mention the very important detail that the mother doesn't live. It's important, you know. Okay. So Asclepius, while he was alive and lived as a human being, was a doctor, but because he was a demigod, he was a really good doctor. So good, in fact, that he got into trouble with Hades, the god of the underworld, because he wasn't just saving people from dying, but rather he was resurrecting people, and Hades was getting super cheesed off because, okay, it's tough to be Hades. He has to live underground all the time. He doesn't get out much. He has to constantly be playing like hall monitor for a bunch of dead people's shades. It's kind of frustrating work. His wife's gone half the year. It's just him and his dog. His dog's adorable. It's got 3 heads, so it's kind of like 3 dogs, but even 3 dogs isn't enough to make that okay. So like the one perk he gets out of this, well, all the gemstones, but also he gets to keep the souls of mortals, and they should stay put. That's like his job and also his thing. And if you can take souls out of the underworld, you are messing with Hades' turf. So Hades struck Asclepius dead. But Hades is one of the least jerky of the Greco-Roman gods. Hades allowed demigods, or even particularly effective mortals, to have a divine presence in the world above. Not all gods, ancient Greeks and Romans thought, lived above the underworld in the sky. They also believed that there were gods who were based out of the underworld, whom you could pray to for intervention, and one of these is Asclepius. So Asclepius became the god of healing in his own right, and he really got to be a major figure around the late 5th, 4th century BCE, probably in the wake of a pandemic that hit Athens in 430. We still don't know what the pathogen was for that one, by the way. We're working on it, but we don't know. But if you're interested, they call it the Plague of Athens or the Plague of 430. It might have been a hemorrhagic fever, which is kind of nifty, but beyond the scope of what we're doing right now. Okay. So here is how you go about worshiping Asclepius. Before we do that, though, we need to talk about one of his major helpers. It's a family business. Asclepius, his 2 sons, and his 2 daughters all collaborated as part of this mini pantheon of healing and healthcare. I'm going to introduce you to just one of them in this next slide. Oh, right. We also need to talk about the awkward matter of the caduceus of Hermes versus the rod of Asclepius. These may look like very similar symbols. They're very different in Greco-Roman religion. The one on the right, this here, with the large rod with the one snake, that's the healing one. That's the Asclepius rod. That is the one that keeps sick people from going to the underworld. Awkwardly and confusingly, this one here that I'm about to outline in blue, right there, that is the caduceus of Hermes. Now, it may look like snakes on a stick, but this is a very different snake on a stick thing. There are two snakes on a stick that has wings on it because Hermes has like wings. And this is the staff that Hermes uses to lead the souls of the recently dead from the world of the living to the house of Hades. This is the stick that takes you from being alive to being dead. In other words, this is the death stick. So, the one on the red, one snake, no death. Two snakes, yes, death. And this is super awkward because a lot of medical associations get the wrong snake stick. American Medical Association. EMS, though, good job. And dentists get this right. So if you're going into EMS or dentistry, you can feel very smug about yourself. Okay. On to... Oh, I don't have a picture of Hygeia. Well, that's sad. Asclepius' daughter Hygeia is the goddess of preventative medicine, and I bring her up because her name gives us the word hygiene for preventative medicine via washing your hands and wearing masks and staying home if you can. Hi, Hygeia. Now, you would worship Asclepius in a couple of ways. One of them was you would come to one of his temples, either the main one, it was an Epidaurus if you want to know, but they were branch offices in pretty much every Greek-speaking city of the Mediterranean, and eventually just every city in the Mediterranean had one of these. And you would go there to either buy or bring a model of the body part that you wanted Asclepius to intervene for. On the left, I'm going to use my blue marker again, we have one such votive offering or votive plaque. This is carved out of marble. This is a fancy one, and it says in Greek, for those of you who read Greek, so starting here at the top with the A, that's an alpha and a sigma, so it says Ascle, P-O, to Asclepius. Kai is the Greek word for and, so to Asclepius, and Hygeia, Hygieia, so to Asclepius and his daughter Hygeia, the goddess of health. Tyche means either the goddess of luck or might be the patient's name is Tyche. It's an ancient Greek name, it means lucky. Eucharisterion means a thank offering. So this basically says, for Asclepius and Hygeia, Tyche gives this thank you gift, this thank you note. So if you were healed, you would give one of these to the sanctuary and they'd display it as a testimonial saying, hey, look, Asclepius healed this leg. But you would also bring these offerings as part of your prayer for health ahead of time too. And that's what we've got going on the right here with the red circle around it. This I quite love because it's a votive plaque, so there's the thank you art plaque showing the patient coming to the sanctuary and bringing his model leg. And you'll notice that he's putting it on a pedestal in a row of feet and legs. This seems to have been a thing. You'd bring your offering to the section of the temple where people put your body part, and there'd just be this whole stack of body parts hanging out in different parts of the temple. This particular leg, if you look at the carving, there's a little wiggly line up the side of the leg right here. That's a varicose vein. Likely this patient was praying to have a varicose vein heal. And in their thank you offering, they show themselves bringing the leg to the temple in the art as a way of saying, look, I brought a leg and I got a leg. So this is a big part of the worship ritual, is you bring a model of the body part, and if Asclepius heals you, then you have to bring a nicer model of the body part. Asclepius just loves body parts. in a not creepy way. It's actually quite creepy. The other way that you would access a cure at a temple of Asclepius is a little bit more involved. It's a process called incubation. This doesn't mean sitting on an egg. Rather, it means sleeping overnight either in the temple or in the sacred precinct around the temple. To illustrate what I mean by this, here we're looking at the floor plan of one such temple to Asclepius. This one is in Lerna, if I remember correctly. So the archaeological site has a small temple on the inside. Greek and later Roman religious sites included a temple, and then there would be a wall around the edge of the temple, which I'm outlining here. The big red line is the temenos wall. That tells you where the sacred ground is and where the line is between sacred ground and normal ground. Once you're inside that wall, you have to behave in a certain way. For instance, you're not allowed to murder anyone inside the temple grounds. So spilling human blood, very bad. You're not supposed to give birth there, which becomes awkward for some of Asclepius's patients. A lot of the patients and their stories about how this worked out were like, I prayed to give birth and I had to waddle outside of the wall really quick to give birth. Them's the rules. You're also not supposed to dirty the area, litter there. You're not supposed to have dead bodies in the area. This is where temples of Asclepius were a little different, because in many temples, sick people aren't allowed to be there. In fact, not just sick people, but also people with disabilities. If you had a limb difference, there were some temples, in fact, many temples, where you weren't allowed to sacrifice to the gods because people with limb differences were considered inappropriate for a place of the gods. The gods only wanted perfect whole bodies, which is super ableist. Interestingly, there were some ancient people who protested this, including this one badass war veteran in ancient Rome who had lost both of his hands in different battles and been wounded like 20 times. And when he was praetor, he had this prosthetic hand and he wanted to go offer sacrifices. And his colleagues were like, nah, brah, you got to have all your arms to sacrifice to the gods. And he's like, look, with my one prosthetic hand, I've killed more enemies of Rome than you guys have with your two hands, so I think I have enough body to sacrifice to the gods. There, jerks. I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head. It's kind of messing with this example, isn't it? In the Temple of Asclepius, this wasn't the case. This was a place where sick people were invited inside the sacred precinct, sometimes inside the temple, but mostly just inside the wall area. And there were these purpose-built enclosures where you would sleep overnight, and the sacred animals would come and touch you while you were sleeping there. The animals sacred to Asclepius are dogs and snakes. The dogs would lick you and the snakes would crawl all over you, and while you dreamed, if you could sleep with puppies licking you and snakes crawling all over you, it seems that people were drugged. I think that would help if you want to go sleep in a snake pit. I love snacks, I do, but I don't know. The puppies might be nicer. So while you dreamed, the idea was that the god would come to you in your dream and would give you a miraculous cure or would suggest for you a way that you could cure yourself when you woke up. We think there may have been physicians practicing as part of the temple priests. There's some evidence that there was a little bit of overlap between medical practice and medical training and this religious context. Certainly, doctors didn't see this as competition. I mean, some raise their brows at it a little bit, but most doctors would routinely go to the local temple of Asclepius to make an offering at the beginning of their career or after a particularly good cure to give thanks to the god, because it was seen as important for doctors to show that they were upstanding members of the community, and this meant honoring the gods. Now, some doctors were more religiously observant than others. Just like today, people are people. People have different responses to their religious environment, but it would be wrong to look at Asclepius as in competition with rationalizing medical practice. Rather, the two seem to have coexisted pretty comfortably. Now, I bring all this up because at a certain point, in the city of Rome, and this was a regular thing for Rome, whenever they were in crisis, especially pandemic crisis, and this happened pretty regularly because Rome supported a large population with poor sanitation. It was in a malarial basin on swampy land with a poorly draining river through the middle of it, and people were coming from all over the Mediterranean in larger and larger numbers as we get closer to the first centuries CE. This means you have the perfect storm for disease outbreaks and pandemics. Diseases rip through Rome on a regular basis. They're a couple a decade. So in this one particular instance, the priesthoods of Rome and the Senate asked the gods, okay, what can we do to resolve this particular epidemic? And the answer was, okay, you need to get one of the sacred snakes from the mother temple of Asclepius at Epidaurus and bring it to Rome. So they sent a boat, got a snake, brought the boat up the river Tiber, and then, according to legend, the boat stuck in the Tiber, rooted, and became an island. You're looking at the island. This is Tiber Island. This, however, is not the temple to Asclepius. That was torn down. There's a Renaissance palace built on top of it. That's what you're looking at, is the Renaissance palace. But what this means for the period in Roman history we're going to be dealing with is that one of the major shrines in the city of Rome was dedicated to Aesculapius, their version of Asclepius. And it was on this island in the middle of Tiber, allowing them to separate the sick from the well a little bit. Now, this all sounds really nice and pro-social, but I'm so sorry. This is about to get super depressing, and not for the first time. The ancient Mediterranean was a slave-owning society. Ancient Rome was a particularly high-volume slave-owning society, and enslaved people who were sick or injured or too old to work were routinely dumped at the temple of Aesculapius on Tiber Island to die, so that the people who had enslaved them and profited from their labor didn't have to take care of them in their old age. Now, this was considered tacky, but it was happening a lot. And there is some good news here. One of the first moves to regulate human rights for enslaved people ever comes in the reign of the Emperor Claudius, who made it so that if you abandoned an enslaved person on Tiber Island, and that person subsequently recovers, you cannot come back and claim that person as your slave, nor can you claim them as your patron. That'll make more sense later in the course. In other words, by abandoning them on Tiber Island, you are freeing them. Now, possibly some of what Claudius was trying to do was trying to solve the very real human rights problem posed by abandoning sick slaves. Just because Romans are doing it a lot doesn't mean some Romans didn't see a problem with that. Part of what gives me hope sometimes when I'm tackling slavery in ancient context is that it's not just modern people looking at Romans going, oh my God, that's so bad. Ancient Romans are already starting to say, this doesn't seem right. Sometimes the same people who are also trafficking human beings, like the bar is very low and hypocrisy is rife. This hypocrisy is still rife, right? It's one thing to admit something is unethical and another thing to refuse to do it. The economic realities of our world make us do things we find unethical more than I'd like to admit. Maybe you're better at that than I am, but the less happy interpretation of what Claudius was trying to do here may be that the temple was no longer able to deal with the glut of sick and abandoned old people they found themselves in possession of. They just couldn't handle it, and there needed to be some kind of disincentive to keep people from abandoning their most vulnerable trafficked people. So Yeah, sorry, that went to a depressing place again. But that's an important thing to confront early and often. That's going to be with us as we take our journey through the world of Roman doctors and Roman healers. Enslaved people are going to be physicians and patients, and it's something that you're going to have to keep in your mind as you think about how the text we read would apply to you if you were one of these enslaved people in the ancient world. Per capita, you or someone related to you would be statistically more likely to be adjacent to enslavement, if not enslaved themselves, than they would be likely to, say, hang out with Pliny the Elder or go catch lunch with Cato.